December 7, 1941. A quiet Sunday morning settles over the Hawaiian Islands. The sun climbs slowly above the Pacific horizon, casting long golden ribbons across the still waters of Pearl Harbor. Somewhere on the deck of a battleship, a young sailor leans against the railing, watching the light dance on the surface of the ocean, thinking perhaps of home, of family, of the breakfast waiting for him below deck. Church bells ring in the distance. Children laugh in the streets of Honolulu. A gentle breeze moves through the palm trees. It is, by every measure, a perfectly ordinary morning. No alarm has been raised. No orders have been issued. No one standing on those shores, gazing out at the rows of magnificent warships anchored in the harbor, could possibly imagine what the next 2 hours would bring. No one could know that the tranquility surrounding them was not a promise, but a final, fleeting gift, that within minutes, the sky above this peaceful island paradise would be torn open by the roar of engines, by the whistle of falling bombs, by fire and smoke, and the terrible sounds of a world at war arriving without invitation on American soil. This is the story of December 7, 1941, the day that changed everything. To understand what happened at Pearl Harbor, we must first understand the world in which it happened. By the autumn of 1941, much of the globe was already consumed by war. In Europe, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany had swept across entire nations with terrifying speed. France had fallen. Britain stood alone, battered by nightly bombing raids, defiant but exhausted. Millions of lives had already been lost, and the end was nowhere in sight. In Asia, the Empire of Japan had been waging war against China for years, an expanding campaign of conquest that alarmed Western governments but had not yet drawn the United States into direct conflict. Japan's military leadership spoke openly of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a vision of Japanese dominance stretching across the entire Pacific region. And yet, the United States remained officially neutral. Most Americans wanted nothing to do with the wars unfolding on the other side of the world. They had lived through one catastrophic World War already. They had endured a decade of economic depression. The mood across the country was one of exhausted caution, a deep and understandable reluctance to send American sons into foreign conflicts once again. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood the danger gathering on both horizons. He had been quietly supporting Britain with supplies and resources. He had imposed strict economic sanctions on Japan, cutting off crucial oil shipments in response to Japan's military aggression in Asia. But publicly, America was not at war. That was about to change. In Tokyo, Japan's military commanders were growing increasingly impatient. The American oil embargo was crippling Japan's war machine. Without fuel, Japan's navy could not sail, its aircraft could not fly, its armies could not advance. Japanese leadership faced a stark choice: negotiate a diplomatic settlement with Washington and pull back from their conquered territories, or strike first, boldly and decisively, before America could move against them. They chose to strike. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of Japan's combined fleet and one of the most brilliant naval strategists of his era, had long warned his government that war with the United States would ultimately be unwinnable. America was too large, too industrially powerful, too rich in resources. But if war was coming regardless, Yamamoto believed Japan's only hope was a single, devastating blow. A surprise attack so swift and so overwhelming that the United States Pacific Fleet would be crippled before it could respond. The target was Pearl Harbor. Through the summer and autumn of 1941, Japanese pilots trained in secret, practicing low-altitude torpedo runs over shallow water. Naval engineers modified their torpedoes especially for the shallow depths of the harbor. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and dozens of support vessels quietly assembled and set course across the North Pacific, maintaining strict radio silence. They traveled through fog and storm, deliberately avoiding the main shipping routes, moving unseen across thousands of miles of open ocean. Diplomatic negotiations continued in Washington throughout November, deliberately, some historians believe, to mask Japan's true intentions. American codebreakers had intercepted signals suggesting an attack was imminent somewhere in the Pacific, but the precise target remained unknown. The fleet sailed on. At 6:00 in the morning on December 7th, 183 Japanese aircraft lifted off from the decks of 6 carriers positioned roughly 230 miles miles north of Oahu. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, a vast aerial armada roaring into the early morning sky, forming up into attack formations and turning south toward Hawaii. At 7:02 a.m., two Army privates operating an experimental radar station on the northern tip of Oahu detected an unusually large formation of aircraft approaching from the north. They reported it immediately to their duty officer. He told them not to worry. A flight of American B-17 bombers was expected from the mainland that morning. It was almost certainly that. It was not that. At 7:53 a.m., the lead Japanese commander, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, peered through his cockpit window and saw Pearl Harbor spread out below him in the morning light. The long rows of battleships, the airfields, the fuel depots, everything precisely as it had appeared in the reconnaissance photographs. The Americans had no idea what was coming. He transmitted the signal to attack. At 7:55 a.m., the bombs began to fall. The first explosions ripped across the airfields at Hickam and Wheeler, destroying American aircraft on the ground before they could be scrambled into the sky. Then came the torpedo planes, skimming just feet above the surface of the harbor, releasing their weapons into the water with deadly precision. Bombs rained down on Battleship Row, the long line of American warships moored along Ford Island at the heart of the harbor. Within seconds, a peaceful Sunday morning became the most catastrophic attack ever launched against the United States on its own territory. The scale of destruction that unfolded in the following minutes was almost incomprehensible. Battleships that had seemed so permanent, so invincible, were burning and sinking. The USS Oklahoma capsized completely, trapping hundreds of men inside its hull. Rescue workers would spend days cutting through steel plates in desperate attempts to reach survivors. Some were pulled out alive, many were not. The USS West Virginia took multiple torpedo hits and began to sink, though her crew fought valiantly to keep her pumps running and her guns firing until the very end. The USS California, the USS Nevada, the USS Maryland, all struck, all damaged, all burning. And then there was the USS Arizona. At 8:06 a.m., a Japanese bomb penetrated the forward deck of the Arizona and detonated near the ship's ammunition magazine. What followed was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in the history of naval warfare. The entire forward section of the ship was obliterated in an instant. The force of the explosion was so tremendous that men standing on other ships nearby were knocked off their feet. A column of fire and black smoke rose hundreds of feet into the sky. The USS Arizona sank in less than 9 minutes. Of the 1,177 men aboard, 1,102 were killed, most of them in that single terrible moment of detonation. Many of them remain entombed in the ship to this day, beneath the white memorial that now stretches across the sunken hull. Across the harbor, the air was thick with smoke, the waters slicked with burning oil. Men swam through flames to reach the shore. Others clung to wreckage, calling out for help that was still fighting its way through the chaos to reach them. And yet, even in the middle of this catastrophe, something remarkable was happening. Americans were fighting back. They had been caught completely off guard, attacked without warning, with no time to prepare. Many were still in their pajamas when the first bombs fell. But within minutes, even seconds, sailors and soldiers began responding with extraordinary courage, manning their guns, organizing rescues, pulling injured men from burning water, making decisions under fire that no amount of training could fully prepare a person for. Anti-aircraft guns that moments earlier had stood silent and unmanned were suddenly blazing into the sky. A handful of American pilots managed to get airborne despite the chaos on the airfields, engaging Japanese aircraft in desperate, unequal dogfights. Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor and Lieutenant George Welch scrambled to a secondary airfield that had not been bombed, took off under fire, and between them shot down at least 6 Japanese planes. Ensign Herbert Jones, already badly wounded, refused to leave his post at an ammunition hoist, continuing to pass shells to the guns above until he was killed by a direct hit. Chief Pharmacist's mate John Vason worked through the attack and long after, operating on wounded men with no concern for the bombs falling around him. Doris Miller, a black mess attendant aboard the USS West Virginia, who had never been trained on a weapon, carried his mortally wounded captain to shelter, then manned an anti-aircraft machine gun and fired on Japanese planes until ordered to abandon ship. He would later become one of the first African Americans to receive the Navy Cross. In the chaos and the fire and the smoke, ordinary people discovered something extraordinary inside themselves. At approximately 9:55 a.m., the last Japanese aircraft turned away from Pearl Harbor and headed back toward the waiting carriers. The attack had lasted less than 2 hours, but the silence it left behind was not peaceful. It was the silence of devastation, of burning ships and ruined airfields, of men calling out across the water, of a harbor that had been transformed in less than 120 minutes from one of the most powerful naval installations in the world into a scene of almost unimaginable destruction. The numbers, when they were finally tallied, were staggering. 2,403 Americans were dead. 1,178 more were wounded. 18 ships had been sunk or heavily damaged, including 8 battleships. Nearly 200 aircraft had been destroyed, most of them on the ground, before a single pilot could climb into a cockpit. The Pacific Fleet, the cornerstone of American power in the Pacific Ocean, had been gutted. Japan had achieved something close to the strategic surprise it had sought, but not everything had gone according to plan. The American aircraft carriers, the ships that would prove decisive in the Pacific War to come, had not been at Pearl Harbor that day, and the submarine base, the fuel storage facilities, and the repair yards, all of which would prove essential to America's ability to fight back, had survived largely intact. The Japanese fleet turned north and sailed for home. Behind them, they left a harbor in flames and a nation on the verge of transformation. Word of the attack spread across America with stunning speed. Radio broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Families gathered around their sets in living rooms across the country, listening in stunned silence as announcers described scenes that seemed impossible. An American naval base attacked, American ships destroyed, American lives lost by the thousands on a quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii. The mood in the United States shifted in a matter of hours. The long, difficult debate about neutrality, the arguments, the protests, the careful political calculations that had kept America out of the war effectively ended the moment the first Japanese bomb hit the first American ship. The following day, December 8th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before a joint session of Congress and delivered one of the most consequential speeches in American history. His voice was calm, measured, filled with a quiet, controlled fury. He spoke of a day of infamy. He spoke of the lives lost and the ships destroyed. He spoke not with desperation, but with absolute certainty about what had to happen next. Congress voted to declare war on Japan. The vote in the Senate was unanimous. In the House, there was a single dissenting vote. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. America was now fully committed to both theaters of the greatest war in human history. The era of neutrality was over. The era of total war had begun. The attack on Pearl Harbor did something that years of debate and diplomacy had been unable to do. It united the American people with a single shared sense of purpose. Within days of the attack, recruiting offices across the country were overwhelmed with men lining up to enlist. Factories that had been producing consumer goods began converting to war production with breathtaking speed. Women entered the workforce in numbers never seen before. The entire economic and industrial machinery of the most powerful nation on earth began to pivot, fully and urgently, toward winning a war on two sides of the world simultaneously. The road ahead would be long and brutal. The Pacific War, in particular, would be fought across thousands of miles of ocean, on tiny island atolls, and in thick jungle, at enormous cost in human life. It would last nearly 4 more years. Tens of millions of people around the world would die before it ended. But in the story of World War II, Pearl Harbor stands as a pivotal turning point, the moment when the balance of the conflict began, slowly and at great cost, to shift. American industrial output would eventually dwarf that of Japan and Germany combined. American forces would fight their way across the Pacific island by island, year by year, until the war came to its final, devastating conclusion in August of 1945. Japan's attack had been intended to cripple the United States, to buy time and freedom of movement for Japanese expansion across the Pacific. Instead, it awakened something, a resolve that would prove impossible to extinguish. Today, the USS Arizona still lies where she sank on the morning of December 7, 1941. A white marble memorial stretches above the sunken hull, built directly over the ship, so that visitors can stand above the wreck and look down into the water that has been her sailor's tomb for more than 80 years. On a clear day, you can still see the outline of the ship below the surface. Oil still seeps slowly from her ruptured fuel tanks, a few drops at a time, rising to the surface, disappearing into the Pacific. Some call it the ship's tears. The names of all 2,403 Americans who died on December 7th are recorded and remembered. They were farmers and factory workers, students and career soldiers, men who had enlisted for steady pay during the Depression, and men who had dreamed of serving their country since childhood. They were young. Most of them were very young. Many of them had barely begun to live. Pearl Harbor is not simply a military event frozen in history. It is a human story, a story about what ordinary people are capable of when extraordinary circumstances demand everything they have. It is a story about the cost of war and the weight of the decisions that lead to it. And it is a story about memory, about the obligation that falls on those who come after to understand what happened, to honor those who suffered it, and to carry the knowledge of it forward.